I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Mackenzie Phillips, the author of Hopeful Healing, Essays on Managing Recovery and Surviving Addiction. Just a little bit about Mackenzie. She'll be here very shortly, so I don't want to hold things up. She is the daughter of John Phillips and stepdaughter of Michelle Phillips, the lead singers of the Mamas and the Papas. She has written a previous book, High on Arrival, and she starred as Julie Cooper Horvath on the sitcom One Day at a Time alongside Valerie Bertinelli. Today she works at Breathe Life Healing Center in West Hollywood as a substance abuse counselor. So will you please join me in welcoming Mackenzie Phillips.
Hi guys, we're small but mighty tonight. Aww. Small but mighty. It's very lovely to be here. I'd like to say hi to my friend Sue and her beautiful service dog Shadow. It's so great to see you. I'm just thrilled that when you sent me a message on Facebook that you were coming out tonight, I was just really happy. Hi. You've got a concerned look on your face. So thank you. It's really cool to be here. I love Seattle. I spent about a month here in 2005, I think. We were doing the tech rehearsals for the Broadway tour of Annie. And this is where we did the premiere of the whole tour. So we were here like dancing and, doing the blocking and all that kind of stuff for a long, long time. So I got to spend a fair amount of time in this lovely city. And I'm really glad to be back. So I've been on a tour with the book. I was in New York City and did a signing there, and then I got snowed in a blizzard, so I couldn't go anywhere. And flight after flight after flight kept getting canceled, and I was supposed to go on to Tampa. So we had to scrap the whole Tampa event. But then I went on a cruise ship, that's my phone. You want to put it on silent? Is that my phone dinging? Then I went on a cruise ship for a week that was part of the book tour, believe it or not, and I still feel like I'm on the ship. Like, it's very strange. And then I'm here, and then was in Portland yesterday, and then on to Dallas, and then home to LA. So it's been quite a journey from High on Arrival to Hopeful Healing. Definitely a whole different animal, a whole different approach to telling my story. Writing High on Arrival was sort of like, I gotta get it out. And then there was such an incredible tidal wave of backlash where people were sort of, I remember one news outlet had a body language expert looking at video of me to decide whether or not I was actually telling the truth. Whether or not my sharing of my life and my story was a fabrication. And I remember feeling really sad. The word I wanted to use was bereft. That's a powerful emotion when one feels bereft. So I became sort of gun shy. I was like, do I want to write another book? What am I going to write it about? And then at one time I was thinking I would write a book called Everything I Left Out of High on Arrival. And then I thought that's a really bad idea because, everything you left out was the stuff that you felt wasn't appropriate, and the stuff that was appropriate already made people go crazy. So I didn't do that. That was like, okay, let's rethink this. So here we are almost 8 years later, and a lot has happened in those years. Not only has my son turned 30, oh my God, I've turned 57, and I got to this point in my life where I was taking stock. One comes to a time where one takes stock. And I thought, wow, I am not going to be alive as long as I already have. And if I am, then I'm going to be like Methuselah, some sort of miracle anomaly. What do I want to do? We come to that moment where we say, why am I here? Why did I come? What's my purpose? Where do I fit in? And I came from such a specific type of profession, so many years riding that acting train. It's like, wow, I'm doing good. This is great. But then I was thinking, well, what am I really passionate about? What do I really want? I really want to be of service to the addict who is still suffering. Having been, a chronic relapser, having been a person who went to treatment 11 times, I felt as though I might have a particular perspective that might be useful and helpful to people who are trying to get sober and trying to get clean and trying to change their lives, trying to shift their state of being. Because in order to manifest a full and beautiful recovery, there has to be some sort of shift in the way, the state of being that you live in, the way you operate, the way you see the world, the way you react to causes or things around you. You know, that has to change. And so I went, wow, I guess I'm going back to school. I went back to school at like 50 and started working, you know, doing my intern hours. Like, I don't know if you've ever done intern hours in a behavioral health facility, but you're literally following a therapist around going, what do you want me to do next? What do you want me to file? What do you want me to chart? You know, I'm scanning things, I'm sending faxes, believe me, I thought that counseling, you just sat and talked to people, and that it was like this lovely one-on-one experience. Well, that's 30% of it. The other 70% of it is documentation. Document, document, document. So I have become proficient at electronic medical records, charting. And then I just found out tonight that I work at a place called Breathe Life Healing Centers in West Hollywood, and I'm a primary counselor there, and most of the other people there are LMFTs, they're therapists, and but we use this electronic charting system, which was quite a learning curve to familiarize oneself with. And I just found out we're switching electronic charting systems next week. So I'm going to come from this sort of, I'm on a book tour, you know, people are doing my makeup, I'm running around on a cruise ship, to, you know, mandatory in-services, staff in-services on Kipu, which is a new electronic charting thing. So that's what's going on in my life. And I'm so grateful that you guys came out tonight to be with me. And I was wondering if I could just read a chapter of Hopeful Healing to you guys. Is that something you'd like? I really love this chapter. It's called Stranger in a Strange Land, and it's on identity. Is this? Yes, it hasn't been cracked. That's great. Each chapter opens with a quote from Glinda the Good Witch to Emily Dickinson, but this one is from Dolly Parton, which I find tickles me. She says, "Find out who you are and do it on purpose." Thank you, Dolly. It's pretty powerful. A while ago, when I was struggling with some issues, I was sitting in my living room and a bird smacked into the window. I jumped up and I ran outside before I even knew what I was doing. The bird lay in the yard, stunned. I think it was a wren of some sort. It had beautiful brown speckling and a gray breast. I didn't want to leave it there because cats regularly patrolled the neighborhood, so I gently scooped it up, holding it snugly but gently in my hands. Its heart was beating 1,000,000 miles a minute, but it stayed still. I could feel the softness of the feathers and how light those delicate, hollow bones really are. I went and I sat in the backyard holding the bird in my cupped hands for 30 minutes, maybe a little more. I waited until I felt its wings give a small twitch, and then I slowly opened my hands. It rested there for just a couple of minutes before, in a sudden flurry, it flew away. I continued to sit there for a few moments more, full of some feeling I couldn't name, before I slowly stood up and went back into the house. Later that night, thinking on it, still trying to figure out the feeling I couldn't name, I realized I was humbled by how the bird felt as I held it, its fragility juxtaposed against the power in my hands. I was humbled that I had kept it safe, which made me want to cry. The bird, I realized, was like the truest part of myself. If care and patience, gentleness and kindness helped the bird recover from its headlong flight into the window, then why not me? Why not you? That's how it was in early recovery for me. My sense of self felt so fragile, like the bird cupped in my hands. Even when my addiction was active, I could feel myself there, like a trembling thing with a crazed heartbeat, because I was more interested in holding a needle or a drink than being gentle with myself. I broke my own wings a couple of times, along with other delicate things. One of the most messed up things about addiction is that the damage you do is all you. You're not a different person when you're using. Even though the addiction's driving, you're still a version of you. Those are your hands doing all that harm to your sense of self. You simply do not have control over it. There are different concepts of what self is, but most agree the self is the essential nature that makes you unique and is responsible for your thoughts and actions. This does not mean that you have total control, but that the self is liable or accountable for your thoughts and actions. For the most part, when you're healthy, your sense of self is a sense that is unified. Addiction fragments you into different pieces. Your sense of self is supplanted by compulsive behaviors and the need to get your next fix. Your body is driven by it, as are your decisions and general thinking. Your spirit, for lack of a better word, that indelible thing that makes you you, sits vulnerable, shoved out of its nesting place by the inexplicable reality that you are doing this to yourself. And this dislocation of self causes the most caustic damage, the worst trauma that addiction delivers to our identity. Most of the time, people think of trauma as an event, a sudden shock of some kind. But trauma can come from chronic stress and strain as well, and both can be applied to addiction in its different stages. Because of this, when we come into recovery, there's a feeling of being fragmented, compulsion having shoved our united sense of self right out of the way. It feels like being a stranger in a strange skin. You are unrecognizable to yourself and nothing feels like it fits. When we think, oh my God, I've totally burned my life down, I have nothing, I feel like I'm nothing, who is this person? I'm not this person. It's hard to look at these thoughts. And it feels like shit when we do. I look at my clients at this stage and I see individuals who can't even see their own individuality. I see people who on some level think of themselves as just the drug or the drink. I am heroin. I am vodka. But from where I sit, I see individuals separate from their drugs and their drink. I see beautiful people who can't yet see their own beauty. You see, perspective is everything. And all the beauty that is within them, well, it allows me to see my own. Soon they will see themselves as I see them. Most of us have a hard time seeing our own beauty when we're struggling with reintegrating all the pieces of ourselves, because a lot of the processes in treatment focus on past behavior and negative consequences, whose heart we broke, all the lies we told. It's easy to just see the ugliness. But even ugliness is beautiful in its own way. This is because the universe doesn't tolerate a lack of balance. The tide, it ebbs and flows. The sun rises and sets. The moon waxes and wanes. Balance. When thinking about darkness and light, sadness and hope, I'm always reminded of a story from one of my times in treatment. We were doing music therapy. I'm using quotation marks here because it drove me up the fucking wall. We'd sit around in a circle with handheld instruments and play along badly with the records. It felt like the lamest thing in the entire world. So there I was, sitting in my long dress with my hair in a bun. If you read the book, it'll explain why I had to wear a long dress and my hair in a bun. Shaking my maracas and mumbling, raindrops keep falling on my head. And my monkey mind is chattering away, saying things like, I've been on stage in front of 35,000 people. What am I doing? This is stupid. But then the next song came on, and I was suddenly struck silent. The song was the prayer of St. Francis set to music. Part of the prayer goes like this: Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Wow, I was speechless. It was just so beautiful in what it was asking of me, of all of us. It brought me peace in a moment when I had none. And all those simple yet profound words brought me balance. When you're presented with examples of all the negative shit that's happened in the past, all the discord and the mistakes and the pain, it can be really easy to lose your sense of identity along the way. When you feel yourself starting to slip side down into a pit of self-hatred and negative self-talk, fight to bring the good into focus. The things that you're living for, the things that you're working toward. Yes, you've probably done some things you're far from proud of, and you may do that again. but that doesn't mean you aren't capable of reaching, or that you don't deserve to have the good stuff on the other side too. I was driving through Laurel Canyon one day, which is a place that's associated with a lot of memories for me, both good and bad. It's a place that I've traveled hundreds, if not thousands of times. It's a place where I've lived. It's also a place where my house burned down. It's a place that reminds me of both the positive, a sense of freedom, and the negative, late at night, driving loaded. I'm sitting on that drive one day and the traffic is brutal, terrible. I'm on my way back from an audition that I feel like I blew. I'm completely in the shit. The negative thoughts are swarming in. All of a sudden, I see my hands on the steering wheel and I think, I'm driving. These are my hands. These hands have held a needle. These hands have soothed a baby. These are my hands. It was such a powerful moment that it took me out of future tripping, regret for the past, and sitting in traffic in a geographical location that holds great emotional power for me. I was able to re-enter my body in that moment. I was able to say, these are mine. I own this. It brought me such peace and joy, this awareness that I could use my hands to destroy, or I could use them to create. This was maybe 20 years ago. But even now, I'll look at my hands sometimes and I will remember that moment when I actually came to the realization that my hands had the power to build or the power to tear down. As you focus on all that went wrong, remember all that went right too. When you're taking stock of when you were cruel, remember when you were kind. When you're listing all of your faults, list your good attributes too. Remember the people who love you. Remember the creative spark of life that is within you. As you struggle to reset your sense of self, you're going to feel uncomfortable, and it's going to be really crappy, but breathe through it. Feeling uncomfortable and crappy is okay. Just being what you're feeling really is okay. If you ask yourself the question, who will I be when I'm sober? When you answer, be fearless. Are you a total metalhead who was a heroin addict? You can still be a total metalhead and not be a heroin addict while you're doing it. Let your freak flag fly, however it flies. Be who you are, but be who you are sober. If I were to fearlessly answer the question, who am I? It would go like this. I'm playful. I'm silly. I'm really smart. I'm a good friend. I'm a fucking awesome mom. I'm compassionate. I'm an empath. I'm an intuitive person. I'm an introverted extrovert. I have a great love of old, beautiful things. I like to have a place to go, to be expected somewhere. I like to have a task at hand. I like to have purpose. I like going to bed at night and reading books and watching TV. And I like talking to my dogs. I need to be on my own in order to recharge. I love junk food, Twizzlers and Laffy Taffy and chocolate, which, let's be real, isn't junk, it's manna from heaven. I'm a naturally cheerful person, a happy monkey. I was born this way. I'm built that way. I'm resilient. No matter what's going on, I can do whatever needs to be done. I'm a super high energy person. I love to twist my double jointed limbs into weird tangles. I'll be facilitating a group and I'll look down and I'll think, oh my God, my shoes are off and I'm twisted up like some sort of human pretzel in front of 20 clients. But that's better than forcing myself to sit normally. I wouldn't be my authentic self if I did. I don't pretend to be some sort of authority figure. I try to keep things real. There are things about you that are just the way they are. But then there are things that you can change. And that makes you who you are. This is not to say that I'm all types of awesome all the time. I can be ego-driven, intolerant, impatient, unkind, defiant, stubborn, and a downright shit. I can get emotionally down and uncertain. I worry and I get fearful. I sometimes feel put upon and I sometimes drag my feet on decisions. While I was using, I was still that naturally happy person, only in a really messed up, distorted kind of way. Let's all shoot some coke. This is beautiful. We're living on outside the confines of society. Isn't this awesome? There's a sick twist on how the disease acts on your thought processes. And it's one of the things that keeps people from getting sober, because the dysfunction takes what's good about yourself and twists it to its advantage. Even though this disease takes your identity and sense of self and mangles it to suit its own purposes, that doesn't mean that your identity is irrevocably lost. Be fearless in the face of these challenges. Don't distance yourself from the good or the bad. This is about knitting yourself back together, not pulling yourself further apart. When you see things you like, mindfully encourage these things in yourself. When you see things you don't like, mindfully work at shifting these aspects of yourself. Remember to practice mindfulness in all things, like we talked about back in chapter 3. Take an inventory on a regular basis and work to make it right if you have done wrong. These are the things you do to find yourself again. I want to read you one more thing, and it's something that I wrote in September, just before like the last author's pass. It says a note about relapse. The world can be a super harsh place, and people are people, fallible and fragile. This book is a guide to loving yourself and loving people, no matter what your history, your story tells you about vulnerability. This is the great gift of being human, the awareness that things are unpredictable, like monsoonal moisture predicting a lovely thunderstorm, and yet you awaken to a sunny day. When my mom died this year, I thought a lot about how I reacted when my dad died in 2001. What a difference a recovery makes. When my dad died, it was like I was incapable of weathering the storm of loss, the uncertain path his death created in my heart. I really thought I would find the deepest sense of freedom from him being gone. I had built a lovely birdcage of denial, and I lived in there. The caged bird does sing. It sings a song of longing, a song of wishing for a better past. I mourned, I keened, and ultimately I relapsed. The wires of love and devastation were so crossed, so much so, that I was unsure I would survive, but I did. I told my truth and I lived. And now I don't just live, I thrive. And you can too. After my mom died, I experienced such a different kind of mourning than I did with my dad. Mourning for my mom was sweet. It still is sweet. My mom loved so powerfully and with so little expectation of devotion that devotion came naturally. I miss her every day. I talk to her every night. I look for signs that she is still with me, and they come. I feel her presence in the way the light hits a particular photo of she and I that sits in place of pride. I feel her in the sweet dreams I can recall as I slide into wakefulness in the early morning. And when I wear her black blazer or her sapphire ring, I feel the deepest love and gratitude. My mom died 18 years sober, and she was a hardcore alcoholic for many years. I honor her and all of us by maintaining my own recovery. Now, maintaining my own recovery has historically not been my strong suit. Relapse is real, and I did it chronically for a long time. In my earlier recovery, as I was living and loving my way to the 10-year mark, I felt untouchable, invincible, even complacent. But catastrophe does not announce its imminent arrival. There is no early warning system like for a tornado or an earthquake. People die, and things fall apart, often without any advance notice. There are internal signs that, had I been mindfully checking in on myself, would have informed me that were things to fall apart, I would not be prepared to withstand the tempest. Now, I've embraced mindfulness practices that allow me to be my own alert system, and in asking my clients to do the same, it keeps me on my toes. If I am going to sit in a counseling session with someone and ask them to do these things, but I am unwilling to do them as well, what does that say about my own ability and willingness to change? But change I did. And I continue to be open to change. I don't always like it. but I remain open to it anyway. I want to live free and clear, open and willing, ready to love and to receive love. If I'm loaded, I lose it all. Thank you so much. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? Yes?
Well, I just started reading when I sat down here this evening and was really taken very sadly by the statistics that you quote.
Yeah.
What do you think needs to be done? Now, I don't live in Seattle, I live north a bit, but I know Seattle is thinking about a
Safe injection site.
Right, right. Which seems to me a smart way to go. But when I read about the beds, it just shocked me. It just shocked me that there are so few available treatment centers. What do you think is the solution?
Well, it's not that there's so few available treatment centers. There are treatment centers everywhere. It's
but
that
costly, aren't they?
they're costly, and people don't have the insurance that they need to be able to afford treatment. There are, like at the Salvation Army, there are programs that are low cost or no cost. I think that the safe injection site is a brilliant idea. I know that a lot of people think, well, you know, if there's a safe injection site, we're not making them get well. But you guys, we're keeping them alive long enough so that they might be able to choose recovery one day. You know, harm reduction is a very powerful thing. You know, and there also is some sort of discussion about families being able to have Narcan in the home. I think that's a brilliant thing. But people say, well, if there's Narcan in the home, they can just keep overdosing and overdosing and never have any consequences, right? I mean, how crazy is that? We're keeping them alive long enough in order to possibly be able to affect some change. I say to some of my clients, not all of them, thank God you had drugs and alcohol, because without that coping mechanism, you may not have made it this far long enough to be in this moment, on this day, in this office, in that chair with me, you know? I know for me, you know, I talk about my drug addiction as like a navigator, a sidekick, and I think that without that, things could be very different. But the saddest thing is that a lot of people die in that relationship with their navigator sidekick. People always say, "Oh, just wait till he hits bottom." You guys, these days, bottom is death. You know, with the kind of drugs we're dealing with and the kind of the opioid crisis that we are in this country, we don't wait for someone to hit bottom anymore. You grab them, you snatch them. You know, well, they have to want it. They don't have to want it to plant the seed. You know, the kind of thing that you can do is, okay, someone will go into treatment, they don't want to be there, they're probably going to relapse, but on some level, you have ruined their drinking and using for them, because there's nothing worse than a head full of treatment speak and a belly full of booze, because you know you're doing the antithesis of survival. You're doing an anti-survival behavior. And so, oh crap, you know, you're about to do a shot. It changes the relationship to your drug of choice. So,
do you think in this current political climate that we're in that things are going to improve, or are they going to go backward?
for drug addicts?
Well, yeah, for treatment and for assistance and help.
I really hope they don't go backwards, because we have made leaps and great strides in the availability of treatment with healthcare. So I don't want to get political up here, but I really am. I'm hopeful. You know, I mean, but at the same time, I'm like, God, what's going to happen? You know, so who knows? I don't know. Anybody else? Yes.
I had read a little bit about you forgiving your father. Can you speak to that somewhat?
Yes. Well, what I learned is that forgiveness isn't for the other person. Forgiveness is for me, so that I can move on, right? And so when, you know, I remember saying to my dad, he was dying, he was in ICU, his second liver, you know, he was born with a liver, and then he got another liver, and he continued to use and drink, you know. And he lived for 9 years with his second liver, but it was clear that he was dying. And he was in ICU for the last months of his life. And I remember I was alone with him in his room in ICU. And, you know, he wasn't really speaking anymore. He had the ammonia in his liver was causing an encephalopathy. Hepatic encephalopathy is what they call it. So odd. I have a dog that has hepatic encephalopathy. It's so weird. Anyway, weird, random. And I said to my dad, I said, I got to say something. I said, all of the things, scary, terrifying, fun, creative, musical, wrong, horrifying things that have happened, I could wish that some of them hadn't happened, but I am who I am today by virtue of everywhere I've been. And so I said, I want you to know that I forgive you. He wasn't speaking anymore at that time, but he did look up at me, and he had a deep sigh, and he rested his head. And I felt a great sense of relief at being able to forgive him. And then when he died, like I said, I thought I'd be free. Oh my God, ding dong, the witch is dead, because there was, like I said, the wires were so crossed, but it wasn't that way. I kept thinking, well, now who am I going to ask? He died without telling me why. What the hell? And I cried, and I said it, and then I keened, and then I came to this realization, it's like Glinda the Good Witch. You had the power all along, my dear. The answers that you need are within. You didn't need him to tell you why, because you don't need to know why. It's odd how things unfold.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Someone else had a question?
Do you think that any drug addiction is it genetic? If there's any kind of genetic thing?
There's certainly a genetic predisposition, a genetic component. I come from a long line of alcoholics and addicts. Now, interestingly, you could have two kids with the same alcoholic family, and one says, I will never be like them. I will never be like them. And then the other one says, well, this sounds cool. I'm going to have a drink. I'm going to, smoke weed or whatever it is. And then the monster, I call it the sleeping monster, the genetic predisposition has to wake up in order for it to become active. And so the one that decides to experiment, the monster kind of goes, I've been hibernating for a long time. I'm hungry. It's like the little dragons in Game of Thrones. The first season, they're like these cute little dragons on her shoulder. That's when the disease is just waking up. And then by season 3, they have to be chained underground and they're breathing fire. That's what the waking up of the Game of Thrones addiction monster analogy that I use. So there are a lot of different components to, but it is characterized by the American Medical Association as a chronic relapsing brain disorder. Which is characterized by persistent use despite persistent negative consequences. I remember driving down the street going, I'm not going to get high, I'm not going to the dealers, I'm not going to the dealers. Crap, I'm at the dealer. You get to the point where you can't not, because the brain chemistry, the neural pathways have been rewired. The reward system in the brain is out of whack. And that's why it drives me crazy when people refer to people as, that's just a hopeless junkie. Look at that fucking drunk, hopeless. No, where there's breath, there's hope. We look at this thing as a moral failing as opposed to a mental health issue or a medical issue. And I think that's where, and I'm trying to break down some of that stigma with my little book here, because, on social media I'll get comments like, you're nothing but a junkie, you're probably not even clean, and I'm like, people, you don't even understand what addiction is. There's Google. Google that shit. Find out find out what it is before you start acting as though you really understand it, because I didn't really understand it. I thought it lived in my body. I didn't know it was in my brain. I didn't even know that, like when I was doing what I was doing when I was younger, I didn't know there were receptors in the brain that heroin actually is somehow oddly built to puzzle piece fit right into that receptor, or that the brain cannot distinguish between alcohol and a benzodiazepine like Valium or Xanax. The brain cannot distinguish a difference between those two substances. This stuff is fascinating to me, so I'll shut up about that because I could talk about it forever. But I find it fascinating As a child, I was always fascinated by behavior and why people do the things they do. I was raised by wolves, kind of, lovely wolves, but wolves who thought it would be fun to, be stoned around their kids and then, give their kids drugs. And the monster woke up. Like by the time I was 11, the monster was awake. And so I was very curious about behavior. Why do people act the way they do? What makes my mom be like this and her friends be like this, but my dad and his friends be like that? And then here I am in the middle, like sort of living this dual life between two households. And I'm a receptor. I'm like a brain receptor for the dysfunction coming in on both sides. And I was really curious about that as a child. So when I was little, I wanted to be what was called back then an abnormal psychologist. That's what I said to my mom, abnormal psychology. It fascinated me. But then the acting train came into town, and I rode that thing as far as it was going for a long, long time. And then I came to that moment that I was talking about earlier. What do I want? What do I love? What's my passion? And that's why I'm standing here right now. That was a long answer. Anybody else have any questions? Or shall we go straight on to signing some books? Thank you. You guys have been lovely. Really appreciate it.